Now in this lesson we're going to talk about creating broken color in the shadows. And this is the subject I'm going to use. And the first thing we're going to consider is the composition. Because again, that's what carries the painting. That's what makes it work or not work, is the composition. So you can have your values right, your color right, but if it's badly composed, it's just not going to work at all. My real interest is in maybe the rocks and the trees. If I find the middle of the picture vertically, that's roughly middle. And if I find it middle horizontally, Photoshop's a good way to do it. But I still use the sketchbook, do small thumbnails where I move the shapes around and create a better composition. And I did it that way for 30-some years before Photoshop. So you don't have to do Photoshop. But it's just a good way for me to talk about it. They have some other things for the computer besides Photoshop that you can use. Helpful to have, but you don't have to have it. But you do want to mess with the composition. You do want to think through the picture and find the best composition. So, first thing I want to think is, do I want more sky or do I want more rocks? And I want more rocks because that's what I'm interested in, is the rocks. Not so much the sky. Not that interesting. Then I need to decide, do I want more trees from the left or from the right side or from the left side? Because it's pretty symmetrical. There's almost the same amount or same weight of kind of reddish orange trees as there is yellow orange trees. So which one do I want showing most? And I want more weight over here and less over here. And I want more in the rocks and less in the sky. So that tells me how to crop. I'm going to start on the cropping, cut off a lot of this red orange and cut off some of the sky and have a lot of the rock and a lot of the yellow trees. So you can see I'm moving the composition over to the right. Now if I find the center, do the X again. And I usually do this on my canvas and on my sketchbook before I do the thumbnails, just so I'm sure to keep things out of center right there. I have a lot less trees here and a lot more trees here. So now it's not symmetrical. More weight on this side, so that balances it off well. And also, it's a lot higher, where before it was dead center going vertically. Now it's higher vertically. More rocks, less sky. And that gives me a lot better composition. So that's how I kind of think through photographs on how to compose them. And I do the exact same thing on a thumbnail. My thumbnails are about 3 by 5 inches big, roughly. I mean, they can be square, they can be 5 by 5 or 4 by 6. And then all I'm seeing is shape. I'm seeing this shape of the vertical trees, the flat ground, and these vertical trees. That's 3 shapes. Then I'm seeing the shape of these hills back in here and a little bit of flat ground there. And then the sky. So I'm breaking this up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shapes. And it's a lot easier to draw and design the picture with 6 shapes than it is with 45, which you could easily find in here if you don't get rid of detail. But I'm trying to see mass and big shape. And the big shapes are predicated on this shadow pattern and then the 2 light shapes in the background, the flat plane and the slanted plane, and then the sky, 3 light shapes. So keeping it as simple as possible, because I can find the value for 5 or 6 shapes a lot easier than I can for 45 shapes. So reduce everything from 4 to 8 shapes. Any more than that, you're getting too picky. You're getting too detail-oriented. And I will block my painting in color-wise with those 4 to 8 shapes. Now, when we think about the shadows here, of course, this is all the foreground is in shadow. So I know I will have different values of shadow. We got lighter shadow in here, a little bit darker shadow, and then really darker shadow. And then maybe 1 or 2 values in between. So I got about 4 to 6 values of dark in here. And everything in here is darker than the background, or darker than the sunlight. There is a few small dark accents back in there. But even though these rocks look real light, some of these yellow leaves and shrubbery look real light, none of it is as light as anything in the sunlight. So keep everything in the shadow dark enough that it stays in the shadow. But I do have a lot of light shadows. So I have to have a value range in there so that I have form in the shadow. And then after I get those 4 to 6 values, probably 3 to 5 values within the shadow, I want to start breaking up each value a different color. So I'll block this in a darker yellow-green. Then I'm going to add a lot of color variation or some color variation. And color variation is same value, different color. And it just gives a sense of finish or detail without creating detail. Detail are these small little dark and light value changes that we see everywhere, just, the dotted stuff. It's value change. That's what detail is. Little value changes. So I want same value, different color for the broken color. Now moving on to some paintings here. This is a painting by Marion Wachtel. She was a California Impressionist, early 20th century. You can see how simple her shapes are. No detail. So that allows her to come into these shadows and create some subtle color variation. There's not a lot. She keeps it fairly simple. But you can see 2 or 3 colors in here that are slightly different. Somewhat the same value. Same thing here. You see a lighter yellow green, orange green, blue green. Looks like some reddish green in there. A little bit of value change, but not enough to make it look like detail. But enough to make it look more refined. Then the further back the shadows go, back in here, very little broken color, but there is some. There's a violet, a blue violet, a little bit of a bluish green in there. Some color variation. The shapes and values are simple, but the color, you can see the color, the broken color in here. The broken color really gives it a lot more punch. It makes the color a lot more interesting, rather than just one flat color in each of the big shapes. But the further away these big shapes go, the simpler they are. They don't need as much color variation. You'll also notice the shadows in the foreground. While they are cool, these are cool greens compared to the sunlit greens. They're more of a yellow green and orange green, and they're real warm compared to the shadow. But these shadow colors are a lot warmer compared to the background shadow. The background shadow is really cool, really blue-violet. Foreground shadows are cool compared to the sunlight, but they're a lot warmer than the background. All the shadows are cool relative to the sunlight, but the foreground shadows are going to be warmer than the background shadows. So be careful that your foreground shadows don't get too blue. Unless you have snow in the foreground in shadow, then that's obviously going to be fairly blue, muted blue, or blue-violet. Generally speaking, shadows get cooler and bluer as they recede. Now this is a painting by Hansen Puthoff, and you can see the foreground here, a lot of shadow in here. And once you can find that shadow pattern and separate the big value changes, the value of the tree, the upright, from the value of the flat plains, the value of the road from the value of the grass. There's about 3 or 4 big value changes there. But then within those big value changes, you want some subtle color changes. And in this tree right here, you can see it, even though it's all somewhat the same value, the dark, there's a bit of a green here, kind of a reddish green. Same thing here, more of a blue-green, green-green, or more of a blue and then a blue-green. And they're just real subtle color changes. This one doesn't have a lot in it. His greens here are pretty much one color with about 2 or 3 different values. But you need that subtle color change in the bigger shapes to create interest, to create color vibration. And you can do it also with temperature. Not just with color change, but a little bit of temperature change. Here I have the same type of thing, foreground shadow, and I've got several different colors. I've got a violet here. I started with a kind of a muted yellow-green, some yellow-green with violet in it, basically, to put the shadow color of this grass here on top of the banks. and then added more violet, just scrub violet right on the canvas, right into the paint. But it's the same value, different colors. So violet there, some reds, oranges, stronger yellow greens, more blue violet here. So I got real small, subtle color changes. And if I make them the same value, they're going to read right. They make your painting look a lot more finished, a sense of detail. But if I add value change, that's going to be little tiny darks and lights, little tiny details that are going to break your painting up too much. Now we need some detail. And you can see the value changes I have here, dark light, 2 values on the log, some smaller darks and lights in this area. And that's detail, and we need some of it, but the problem is we tend to overdo it. But if I can make subtle color changes, not value changes, it's going to read better. Now this one is a lot of shadow, a little bit of sunlight peeking through, but you can see in the snow here that color I started with is a blue and an orange, just a muted blue. Here I've scrubbed in a little Viridian, a little bit of gray, just blue and orange mixed together till I mix a more of a gray, add more orange to the blue till it gets grayer. Some violet, red violet, violet. There's more, just a hint of Viridian here. And again, it's subtle. Red violet over here. It's subtle, but it shows some variation that makes the shadow area read better. I have some value change, a little bit of value change from this shadow color to that shadow color. But outside of that, it's more of just color change. It's those color changes that make it work better in the shadows. Same thing here, the shadows in the hillside. These are leaves that have fallen. Again, my basic colors are a dark red-orange, cad red, a little bit of cad orange, and some violet or blue to mute it slightly. Then I have some green, some stronger red, some alizarin crimson, some Viridian, smaller color change, subtle color change to create more vibration in that hillside. Same thing on the rocks here, some orange, blue, gray. Some of the orange is a bit more alizarin, some of it's a bit more orange. The more you practice that, the more you start to see how it affects your painting. Think through that. Think first, big shapes, big values, get them the right temperature, and then think about how to break up the color to show it a bit more refined.